This is Ray Martinez. Thank you for joining me on the program today. This is Conversations with Ray Martinez. We're going to talk about the story of Gideon. He's found in the book of Judges, chapters 6 through 8. So we're going to be skipping around through some verses around his story, which it's a rich theme about his faith, his obedience, and God's providence. Here are some key biblical verses along with explanations for their significance that I think is really important. I've kind of titled this message, Feeling Inadequate. And Gideon felt inadequate for what he was called to do. I mean, this was kind of a shocker for him. You want me to do that? You ever heard that conversation before? Judges chapter 6, verse 12 says, and that's our key verse, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." This verse really highlights God's recognition of Gideon's potential despite his doubts. It emphasizes that God sees beyond our current circumstances and fears. He calls us to fulfill our purpose. Now, Gideon's answer was really a shock. He didn't know what to think of this. If you look at Judges chapter 6, verse 15, Gideon says, "Pardon me, Lord." Did I hear this correctly? But what he says is, "Pardon me, Lord." Gideon replied, "But how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." Well, Gideon expresses his feelings of this inadequacy. This really illustrates a common theme in biblical narratives where God chooses unlikely leaders to accomplish his plans, reminding us that our weakness do not disqualify us from being used by God. In Judges chapter 6, verse 36 through 37, Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand as you said." Gideon's request for a sign demonstrates his desire for reassurance from God. This teaches us that it's okay to seek confirmation from God within our own lives. It shows that God's patience and willingness to strengthen our faith. So people say, well, don't get fleeced like Gideon was. But really, Gideon just wants reassurance. We all want reassurance, don't we? Yeah, we ask God for reassurance. We ask him to confirm things for us. And if we listen carefully and watch carefully, he does do that. In Judges chapter 7, verse 2, the Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands. In order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her." And then he goes on. I think that's interesting. God wants the people to realize this is him doing it. It's not by their own strength. This is going to take a godly interaction to win. Well, that's an important message, and you'll read throughout the story of Gideon how he whittled down the soldiers to about 300 people and had them bring glass jars and horns. I mean, who wins a war that way? God's instruction to reduce Gideon's army really emphasizes the principle that victory comes from God, not from human strength. So this highlights the importance of humility and reliance on a divine power rather than our own abilities. If we look at Judges chapter 8, verse 22 through 23, it says, "The Israelites said to Gideon, 'Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian.' But Gideon told them, 'I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you.'" That was a bright statement when you think about it. Gideon's refusal to accept kingship illustrates the importance of acknowledging God is sovereignty. It serves as a reminder that leadership should point back to God rather than to the human authority. When we look at the overall takeaways from Gideon's story, God chooses the unlikely. Gideon's story reassures us that God often calls those who feel inadequate or unqualified. And when it comes to faith and doubt, Gideon's journey reflects the struggle between faith and doubt and demonstrates that God is patient and understanding of our uncertainties. Then there's this divine strength in weakness. In times of weakness, we've all felt this. The reduction of Gideon's army illustrates that God's power is made perfect in our weakness, emphasizing reliance on Him. Gideon's story ultimately encourages believers to trust in God's plan, recognizing that His ways are higher than our own, and that He equips us for the tasks He calls us to do. Gideon isn't the only person who felt inadequate. There are many biblical characters that experience feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt, yet God chose them to fulfill significant roles in His plan. Here's a few notable examples along with relevant verses. Moses, if you take a look at Exodus chapter 3, verse 11. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Well, you can see Moses was in total doubt here. What makes me the great guy? So Moses really expressed his feelings of inadequacy when called to confront and lead the Israelites out of slavery. This confrontation is not easy to do. You're talking about a great leader. You're talking about a king of a country. He's the Pharaoh, right? And you're going to go up and tell him what to do? This takes a little bit of guts to do, and it takes God's guidance. Despite his doubts, God equipped him with the necessary ability and support. Then there's Jeremiah. Look at Jeremiah 1, verse 6. "Alas, sovereign God, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young." Well, Jeremiah felt inadequate due to his youth and the lack of eloquence. God reassured him that He would provide the words and the wisdom needed for his prophetic mission. Sometimes we can look at ourselves and say, look, I'm not up for that job. I'm not capable. But when God calls you, God says, I'm going to make you capable. That's basically what He's doing. And then there's David. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 11 through 12. So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." David was initially overlooked as the youngest son tending to the sheep. He was just a little sheep boy. Why would he be considered? So his humble beginnings highlights how God often chooses those who may seem insignificant to accomplish great things. And then let's take a look at Mary, the mother of Jesus. Look at Luke chapter 1, verse 34. And she responds, she says, "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "since I am a virgin." Mary expressed her confusion and sense of inadequacy when visited by the angel Gabriel. Despite her initial uncertainty, her willingness to accept God's plan demonstrates faith in the face of doubt. Isn't that interesting? So you can still have doubt and faith, but the faith kind of shoves doubt to the side. Peter is a great example. Look at Luke 5, verse 8. It says, "When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, 'Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man.'" Peter felt unworthy in the presence of Jesus after witnessing a miraculous catch of fish. His sense of inadequacy did not really prevent him from becoming a foundational leader in the early church. I think he just felt really embarrassed and bad about questioning Jesus. And then all of a sudden he felt like, well, then I'm not worthy of this. But Jesus said, yes, you are. And then let's go back to Gideon again. You know, when we look at Judges 6:15, when he says, "Pardon me, Lord, but now I can save Israel," he was beside himself, right? And he talks about how weak his clan is. Gideon was right when he said, "But how can I save Israel?" That was a good point. Gideon couldn't save Israel, but God would. As previously discussed, Gideon's feelings of inadequacy highlight God's choice of unlikely leaders. This is what God will do for people. If it's just up to us, of course we can't do it. These examples really illustrate a common theme in the Bible. God often calls individuals who feel inadequate or unqualified to fulfill His purposes. Their stories serve as a reminder that our perceived limitations don't hinder God's ability to work through us. Instead, they can be the very means by which He demonstrates His strength and grace. I like what Henry Blackaby said. God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. John Piper's got a great quote that I like. He's got great writings. I like reading what he has to say. The greatest enemy of love to God is not His enemies, but His gifts. And if you think you are inadequate in your life, remember that God uses the inadequate. When you think about it, this quote really emphasizes that even in our feelings of inadequacy, God can and does use us for His purposes. It serves as a reminder that our limitations can lead to deeper reliance on God's grace and His power. If you feel inadequate, then God wants to use you. Let Him use you. Have a blessed day.